The invitation to the Innovatech 50th Anniversary Gala wasn't an act of kindness. It was a power move. My daughter-in-law, a high-level VP, wanted to patronize me. Just the grandma, as she called me. She wanted to show her simple mother-in-law what a real company looked like. She was about to find out, in front of her CEO and everyone she respected, that I was the one who built it. The only sounds in my son's dining room were the scrape of silverware on expensive porcelain and Amanda's voice. The room itself was white. White walls, white marble table, white leather chairs that were cold against my back. Even the air felt sterile, chilled by an air conditioner running too high in November. My son David stared at his plate. He always stared at his plate when Amanda talked about her job. The keynote speaker alone is costing us 6 figures, Amanda said, tapping her fork against her plate for emphasis. Her rings made a sharp clink. The lighting, the catering. We're flying in chefs from Paris. It's the 50th anniversary gala for Innovatech. It is a massive deal, Eleanor. She used my name like a punctuation mark. A full stop. You wouldn't understand the scale, of course. We're talking about a multi-billion-dollar legacy. I picked up my water glass. The crystal was heavy and cold, cut with hard angles. I took a small sip. 50 years, I said, my voice quiet in the echoing room. My goodness, that is a long time. I remember when it was just an idea, Amanda laughed. It was a short, sharp sound like a bark. Oh, I'm sure you do, she said. Back when you were typing memos, right? It's cute. Honestly, I can't even imagine. An office with no computers, just typewriters. She shook her head, a small, pitying smile on her face. David shifted in his chair. He cleared his throat. Amanda, the food is good. It's fine, she snapped, waving a hand. I'm just saying, Eleanor, the world has changed. What I do, what we do at Innovatech, it's a different universe. I'm sure it is, I said. Amanda leaned forward, placing her elbows on the white marble. She was energized now, the center of attention. The entire executive board will be there. The media. The governor is even making an appearance. My team is handling all the logistics. If one thing goes wrong, it's my head. The pressure is immense. It sounds like a very important evening for you, I said. It's important for the company. She sat back, swirling the wine in her glass. You should come. David looked up, his eyes wide. What? Amanda ignored him. She looked directly at me. I have a +1. David is so busy he says he can't be bothered to dress up. David flinched but said nothing. I'd hate for the ticket to go to waste. It will be good for you to get out. See what the real world looks like now? The invitation hung in the air, cold and clinical as the room. It was not kindness. It was a performance. She was offering a day pass to her world, a chance for the old relic to see the shiny future. I was to be her prop. The simple old grandma she could point to, showing how far she, Amanda, had come. I saw the whole evening in my mind. Me standing in a corner, her floating from group to group, her voice bright and false. Her occasionally glancing back at me with that same pitying smile. I don't know, Amanda, David started. Mom might be tired. It's a late night. Nonsense, Amanda said. She can sit. I'll get her a nice chair. It's settled. The gala is next Saturday. Black tie, Eleanor. Do you even own anything black tie? I think I can find something suitable, I said. Amanda nodded, satisfied. Good. I'll have my assistant send a car for you. Don't worry about a thing. She picked up her fork and took her first real bite of the meal, her part in this domestic play finished. I looked at my son. He was already back to studying his plate, his relief visible. He didn't have to be the buffer. He didn't have to find a date. His wife had found a way to show me off and patronize me in a single, efficient move. I placed my napkin on the table. How thoughtful, Amanda, I said, my voice perfectly even. I'd be delighted to come. The car did not smell like a car. It smelled like Amanda's perfume, a sharp, green scent that seemed to coat the inside of my throat. She was driving, not her assistant, which I sensed was a last-minute change that had soured her mood. Her knuckles were white on the steering wheel. "The valet line is going to be a complete disaster," she muttered, tapping her acrylic nail against the GPS screen. Tap, tap, tap. I told them we needed a separate executive drop-off, but logistics clearly doesn't understand what that means. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands folded in my lap. My dress was black velvet, simple, and decades old, but the fabric was heavy and warm. Amanda, beside me, was encased in a silver dress that looked like it was made of sharp metallic scales. She kept tugging at the neckline. "Now, Eleanor," she said, her eyes fixed on the traffic ahead. "When we get inside, just follow my lead, all right? I'll be very busy. I'm basically running this thing. I'll introduce you to people, but I need you to just smile. Don't, interrupt." "I wouldn't dream of it, dear," I said. "And please," she let out a sharp sigh, "please do not try to talk to the executives about your old job." I turned my head to look at her. "My old job?" "Yes, your secretarial work, or typing, or whatever it was. It's not relevant. These are serious people, Eleanor. They are running a global company. They won't get it. We stopped at a red light." She turned to look at me, her face a mask of strained patience. "I mean, think about it. A secretary? From 50 years ago? It's practically a historical artifact. They'll just be confused. They'll smile at you, but they'll be wondering why I brought you. It makes me look strange, unserious." The light turned green and she accelerated, the engine humming quietly. "So let's just say you're retired, okay?" "It's simpler. This is my mother-in-law, Eleanor. She's retired, that's it. Can you do that for me?" She was so focused on her own performance, on the image she wanted to project. She saw me as a potential problem, a piece of data that didn't fit her carefully constructed narrative. "Retired," I repeated. "Yes, I suppose that's true enough." "Good. Just stick to the script. I'll find a chair for you. You can have some champagne and just watch. It's an incredible production. You'll be amazed." "I'm sure I will be," I said. I turned my gaze from her back to the window. We were downtown now. Tall buildings of glass and steel blocked the remaining daylight. And then I saw it, the Innovatech Tower. It was 50 stories high, a column of dark smoked glass and gleaming chrome. It was exactly as I had seen it in the architectural drawings. I had argued with the architect about the setback on the 30th floor. He said it was an engineering waste. I insisted. I wanted a terrace up there. From the angle of the car, I could just see the line of trees I had demanded. They were mature now, 50 years old. Impressive, isn't it? Amanda said, mistaking my quiet stare. "That's our headquarters. The gala is in the grand ballroom. It's the most exclusive venue in the city." She sounded like a tour guide. She had no idea I had signed the checks that paid for the very foundation under our wheels, that I had chosen the name Innovatech in my tiny study, writing it on a yellow legal pad. "Whatever you think is best, dear," I said, finally answering her question from minutes before. Amanda gave a sharp, satisfied nod. "Exactly. Just let me handle everything." She turned the car onto a private road lined with flashing lights and uniformed attendants. We joined a long, slow-moving line of black town cars and exotic sports cars. "Finally," she breathed, checking her reflection in the visor mirror, pinching her cheeks. "Showtime." The car in front of us pulled away and we glided forward. A valet in a red jacket stepped up to Amanda's door. Beyond him, massive glass doors opened onto a flood of golden light and a wall of sound, music, laughter, and hundreds of voices bouncing off marble. Amanda took a deep breath, plastered a bright smile on her face, and stepped out of the car. The valet walked around to my side and opened my door. "Thank you," I said, placing my hand in his. I stepped out onto the curb. The cold night air was gone, replaced by the warm draft from the lobby. The noise washed over us. Amanda was already 5 steps ahead, her silver dress flashing under the spotlights. She turned back, her smile tightening into a command. "Well? Come on, Eleanor," she called over the noise. "Try to keep up." The sound hit me first. It was a solid wall of noise. Hundreds of voices were pitched high to be heard over one another. A string quartet sawed away at a fast, frantic piece of music in the corner. The clinking of glasses was a constant, high-pitched rain. The light was just as strong, coming from chandeliers that looked like explosions of crystal. It was a golden, probing light that left no shadows. "God, it's a mob," Amanda said, her voice tight. She grabbed my elbow, her fingers digging into my arm. "Don't get lost." She pulled me into the main ballroom. The scale of it was immense. The ceiling was at least 40 feet high, coffered with dark wood panels. I remembered those panels. I had argued with the architect for weeks. He had wanted a flat modern ceiling. I had insisted on this. I wanted the room to feel permanent, to have history, even when it was new. On the far wall, a screen the size of a small house flashed images. Our first clunky logo, which I had sketched on a napkin. Photos of products I didn't recognize. And then the words, in huge, clean letters, Innovatech, 50 years of progress. Amanda's head swiveled, her eyes scanning the crowd like a bird of prey. "There's Grayson, by the stage, and he's talking to the VP from sales. Perfect." She started forward, then stopped, remembering me. She looked around frantically, then dragged me to the left, out of the main flow of traffic. She parked me next to a tall, thin table, holding a floral arrangement so large it blocked my view of the stage. The lilies had a thick, sweet smell that mixed with the alcohol on the air. "Okay. You wait here," she said. It was a command. "Don't move. Don't talk to anyone. I'll get you a water." Before I could even nod, she was gone. Her silver dress was a flash of light, and then she was absorbed by a group of men in dark tuxedos. She didn't look back. I was left alone, an old woman in a black velvet dress, hidden by a tower of white flowers. I looked around the room. Amanda thought I would be impressed. She thought the noise, the lights, the sheer expense of it all would overwhelm me. I looked at the columns near the entrance. I had chosen that specific cut of marble, the one with the soft gray veins. I looked at the herringbone pattern of the wood floor. I had approved the sample. This was my room. I had built it. I watched the people. They were all so polished and loud. They held their glasses high. They laughed with their mouths wide open. They checked their phones every few seconds. They were networking, shaking hands, but their eyes were always scanning over the other person's shoulder, looking for the next, more important contact. I wasn't in awe. I felt disconnected. The music was too loud. The lighting was too bright. It all felt a little desperate, as if they were all trying so hard to prove how important they were. A waiter in a white jacket offered me a glass of champagne from a silver tray. "No, thank you," I said. He was gone before I finished the sentence. I must have stood there for 15 minutes. Amanda was a blur of silver, moving through the crowd, her laugh sharp and frequent. David was nowhere to be seen. He had probably found a quiet corner in the lobby, just as he did at all of her events. I was about to abandon my post by the flowers and find a real chair when a man stepped out of the crowd. He was older, perhaps in his late 70s like me, with a kind, wrinkled face and a tuxedo that was impeccably tailored. He wasn't looking at the crowd. He was looking directly at me. He tilted his head. His eyes narrowed, not with malice, but with a deep, puzzling confusion. He looked at my face, then away, then back again. He took a hesitant step toward me. Then another. He looked for all the world like a man seeing a ghost. The man stepped closer, his brow furrowed. I beg your pardon, madam," he said. His voice was a dry, soft rumble, hard to hear over the party. "Forgive my staring. You bear a striking resemblance to someone I knew. A very long time ago, is that so? I said, smiling politely. Yes, someone. From the very beginning of this company. He looked around, flustered, as if he was afraid of being overheard. You must be a Vance. Are you related to Eleanor Vance? Before I could answer, a hand gripped my shoulder. The fingers were cold and tight, even through the velvet. The sharp scent of Amanda's perfume washed over me, aggressive and green. Mr. Henderson. So sorry to bother you. Amanda's voice was high and bright, cutting through the man's quiet tone. I see you've met my mother-in-law. I do hope she hasn't been bothering you. The man, Mr. Henderson, looked startled. Bothering? Oh, not at all, Amanda. She's just so impressed by everything. Amanda interrupted. Her hand was still clamped on my shoulder. She turned to the man standing next to her. He was tall, with perfectly gray hair and a dark blue tuxedo that was clearly custom-made. He had the air of someone completely in control. This was her CEO. Mr. Grayson, Amanda said, her voice dropping into a more respectful, charming tone. So sorry about that. Mr. Henderson just got a little confused. She gave my shoulder a patronizing pat. The pat was meant for Grayson to see. See? I'm so good to this old woman. I see you've met my mother-in-law, Amanda continued, stepping slightly in front of me as if to shield Grayson from my presence. I just had to bring her. She's David's mother. Mr. Grayson smiled politely at Amanda. A pleasure, Amanda. A wonderful event. Your team has done a remarkable job. Thank you, sir. It was a team effort. Amanda was beaming. I just wanted Eleanor to see it all. She's just the grandma, you know? She laughed, a light dismissive sound. It's so sweet how impressed she is by all this. Aren't you, Eleanor? It's a bit much, I'm sure. A lot different from your day. Mr. Henderson, the board member, was still staring at me. Amanda, he said, his voice quiet but firm. Who did you say this was? Just my mother-in-law, Amanda said, her smile tightening. Eleanor Price. Mr. Grayson had been politely smiling at Amanda, his eyes moving past her to scan the room. But at the sound of my name, his attention shifted. He looked past Amanda's shoulder and really looked at me for the first time. His polite smile did not fade. It froze. The blood drained from his face. His eyes went wide. I watched his throat move as he swallowed, hard. He stared at me as if I were, in fact, a ghost. The noise of the party, the music, the hundreds of voices seemed to drop away. Amanda didn't notice. She was still talking. She used to be a secretary back in the 60s or 70s. Can you even imagine? With the typewriters and everything? It's just, stop, Grayson said. His voice was a whisper, but it cut through Amanda's chatter instantly. Amanda's mouth snapped shut. Sir? Grayson ignored her. He took a step toward me, his eyes locked on my face. He was comparing me to something in his memory. A photograph. A grainy black and white image from a 50-year-old archive file. I knew the exact photo. I'm sorry, he stammered. His corporate Polish was gone. Amanda called you Grandma, but your name, you're Eleanor. Price? I am, I said. He licked his lips. But before you were Price, are you Eleanor Vance? The air was perfectly still. Amanda let out a short, confused puff of laughter. Vance, she said. No. Her name is Price, Eleanor Price. She's David's mother. I think you're confused, Mr. Grayson. Mr. Henderson, the board member, just whispered, "Oh my God," I smiled. I stepped out from behind Amanda, finally moving free of her grip. I looked directly at the CEO. His face was pale. His hands were trembling slightly. Vance was my maiden name, Mr. Grayson, I said, my voice warm and clear. It carried easily in the sudden quiet between us. It's a pleasure to finally meet you. I've been following your work for many years. I paused, then added, You've been an excellent steward for my little project. Mr. Grayson's jaw dropped. It did not just fall. It hung open. He looked at Amanda, his face a perfect blank of confusion. Then he looked back at me. The confusion was gone. It was replaced by a look I had not seen in a very long time. It was reverence. My God, he whispered. The music was still playing, but his voice was clear to me. You're her. Amanda, finally sensing that something was deeply wrong, stepped forward. Her high-pitched social voice returned. Mr. Grayson, are you all right? I think my mother-in-law is a little confused, she thinks. She's not confused, Grayson said. His voice was shaking. He put a hand to his chest, right over his heart, as if to steady himself. I need... He looked past us, his eyes wide, toward the stage. Excuse me, everyone. He didn't say it to us. He said it to the air. And then he moved. He moved fast, walking briskly, almost running. He pushed past a waiter who was carrying a full silver tray of champagne glasses. The tray tilted. Glasses and liquid crashed to the hardwood floor. The sound of shattering glass made a dozen people turn. But Grayson didn't stop. He didn't even look back. What is he doing? Amanda hissed next to me. Her voice was sharp with panic. He's making a scene. My event. He was already at the small set of stairs at the side of the stage. A young woman with a headset and a clipboard was walking to the center microphone, ready to begin the evening's program. Grayson walked right past her. He grabbed the microphone from its stand. The woman, the scheduled MC, looked shocked. She reached out to stop him. He held up his free hand, a sharp, definite gesture. She froze. A high-pitched squeal of feedback shot through the ballroom. It was a terrible, loud sound. The string quartet stopped playing, their bows lifting from the strings in unison. The noise of the crowd, which had been a constant roar, died in patches. First, the people near the stage went silent, their heads turning. Then, the silence spread, moving like a wave to the back of the room. In less than 10 seconds, the entire grand ballroom was silent. Hundreds of faces, all polished and expensive, turned as one. They all stared at Mr. Grayson. He stood under the bright stage lights, breathing hard, his knuckles white on the microphone. "This is a disaster," Amanda whispered. Her face was pale. "He's lost his mind. He's ruining everything." She was staring at her boss, her eyes wide with a professional's horror. I just stood calmly, my hands folded, and watched him. "Mr. Henderson?" The elderly board member was still standing beside me. He was smiling. "Ladies and gentlemen," Grayson said. His voice boomed through the speakers, echoing in the vast, silent room. I apologize. We had a script tonight. A very good script." He let out a short, nervous laugh. "But this is history." He paused, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "For 50 years," he continued, "this company has celebrated its origin. We all know the story. We talk about the founders, but we all know the truth. It was one person, one mind, one genius who wrote the original code, filed the first patents, and had the vision, and who then, after 20 years, vanished." Beside me, Amanda had gone completely rigid. Her eyes, which had been fixed on Grayson, darted to my face. Then, just as quickly, back to the stage. "She asked to remain anonymous," Grayson said, his voice filling with emotion. "She wanted the work to be the legacy, not her name. For 30 years we've honored that. We have always referred to her in our archives as our mysterious founder." Amanda was shaking her head. It was a tiny, sharp movement, almost a tick. "No," she whispered. "No, no." Grayson was scanning the crowd, his eyes searching. We never thought she would come. We always hoped. We sent invitations to old addresses, to law firms, but we never heard back. We thought she was gone." His eyes found me. He locked his gaze with mine from across the room. "Tonight, she is here." A single, harsh spotlight, operated from a booth in the back, snapped on. It swept across the tables near the front, blinding the guests. "What is he?" Amanda began, her voice a dry rasp. "She's the one who started it all. Grayson's voice cracked, but it was loud. It was a shout of triumph. She is here. Our guest of honor. Ladies and gentlemen, our founder, the architect of Innovatech, Ms. Eleanor Vance. The spotlight was chaotic for a second, sweeping the crowd. Then Grayson raised his arm. He didn't just gesture. He pointed directly at me. The beam of light found me, washing me in pure white light. The floral arrangement beside me was just a dark shadow. It was just me. The entire room, all those hundreds of important people, turned. A sea of faces, all staring. There was a second of total, complete silence. Then, from my side, Mr. Henderson began to applaud. Not politely. He clapped loud and hard. A few other older board members near the front, men who were just names on a letterhead to me, gasped as they recognized my face. They too began to clap. Within 5 seconds, the entire room erupted in applause. I just stood there, calmly, in the light. I felt the warmth of the beam on my face. I turned my head slightly to look at my daughter-in-law. Amanda was frozen. Her face was as white as the lilies on the table. Her mouth was open. Her eyes were fixed on me, wide with a look of absolute, complete horror. "No," she whispered again, though I could barely hear her over the roar of the applause. "No, she was a typist." The spotlight was hot on my face. The sound of the applause wasn't just loud. It was a physical pressure. It beat against my chest and filled my ears, a roaring, continuous thunder. I saw flashes. Not from old-fashioned camera bulbs, but from dozens of modern cell phones held high in the air, their small, bright screens all pointed directly at me. The first person to reach me was Mr. Henderson. The old board member's eyes were wet. His hand trembled as he took mine, holding it with both of his. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice thick with emotion, nearly drowned out by the noise. "I knew it. I knew it was you. I never forgot your face." Before I could reply, the circle broke. It was a flood. Chairs scraped hard against the wood floor as people stood up and surged forward. The social rules of the gala were gone. These were not calm executives. They were excited. Mr. Grayson was suddenly at my side, having rushed down from the stage. His face was flushed. "Miss Vance," he said, his voice breathless. "An honor. A deep, profound honor. I'm Grayson, the CEO." "I know," I said, my voice calm. "You've done well." A shorter man in a bright blue tuxedo pushed forward. "I'm the head of R&D, Ms. Vance. We study your original framework. Your Vance principles are required reading for all our new engineers. We thought you were a myth," a woman in a red dress said, grabbing my other arm. This is unbelievable." Hands reached for me. They shook my hand. They touched my elbow. They touched my shoulder, gently, as if they were afraid I might break or disappear. I was surrounded by a tight sea of black tuxedos and expensive, rustling dresses. The air was thick with the scent of different perfumes, of wine, of excited chatter. "Thank you," I said. "How very kind. A pleasure to meet you." My voice was steady. I was the calm center of a storm of their creation. Through a small gap between a man's shoulder and Mr. Grayson's head, I saw her, Amanda. She was only 5 feet away, but she was in another world. The crowd of executives had formed a tight, adoring circle around me. In doing so, they had pushed her out. She was on the outside, alone. People brushed past her, their backs to her, their faces eager to get a look at me. No one spoke to her. No one even saw her. She was invisible. The woman who had been running the entire gala, the woman who had warned me not to talk, was now just an obstacle. Her face was no longer just white. It was a dull, sick gray. Her mouth was still slightly open. She stared at me, at the people surrounding me, at the scene she could not control. Her hands were clenched into white-knuckled fists at her sides. Mr. Grayson was at my elbow, acting as a gentle gatekeeper. "Please, everyone," he said, his voice full of new authority. Give her some air, please. Miss Vance, we have a private lounge for you. We must talk. There is so much to ask. We have refreshments. I turned my head and smiled at him. The applause was finally beginning to soften into a loud buzz of conversation. I raised my voice just enough to be heard clearly. Just enough for it to carry those few feet to where Amanda was standing. Frozen. Oh, this is all so much fuss, Mr. Grayson, I said. My tone was light, as if I were talking about the weather. I was just happy to come. I almost stayed home tonight. Grayson looked genuinely concerned. You almost stayed home? May I ask why? Well, I said, it all just sounded so big, so professional. I gestured. Just a small, subtle motion with my free hand in Amanda's general direction. But my daughter-in-law was so insistent. You know, Grayson's eyes followed my small gesture. He saw Amanda, but his face was still polite, uncomprehending. She told me I had to come, I continued, my voice clear and pleasant. She said I simply must see what a real company looked like. Grayson stopped smiling. He went very still. He looked at me, and I saw him process my words. He understood exactly what I had said. He understood the implication. His eyes narrowed. Slowly, deliberately, he turned his head. He looked past me, past the people still trying to shake my hand, and he stared directly at Amanda. It was not a look of shouting anger. It was something far worse. It was a look of cold, quiet disdain. It was the look of a chief executive realizing he had been profoundly embarrassed by a subordinate's shocking lack of judgment. It was a look of finality. He held that look for 1, 2, 3 long seconds. Amanda saw it. She saw him look at her. Her spine, which had been so rigid, seemed to collapse. She flinched, a small jerking motion, as if she had been struck. Her eyes, which had been locked on me, finally broke away. She stared at the floor. Mr. Grayson held that cold look on Amanda for a long, heavy second. The air around us was electric and still. The executives who had crowded me were silent, watching their leader. They understood instantly what had happened. They understood the insult. Grayson turned back to me. His professional mask was back in place, but all the corporate smoothness was gone. He was speaking to his boss. Ms. Vance, he said, his voice low and formal. Please, allow me to escort you to the private lounge. We have so much to discuss. The board will want to speak with you. I looked at Amanda. She was still standing in that small, empty circle of shame, her head bowed, staring at the polished floor. That sounds lovely, Mr. Grayson, I said, my voice clear in the relative quiet. But I am feeling a little thirsty. I believe my daughter-in-law was going to get me a glass of water. Weren't you, dear? Amanda's head snapped up. Her face was a terrible mess of humiliation and disbelief. Her eyes were red. She looked from me to Mr. Grayson as if begging him to intervene, to say this was a joke. Grayson's face was unreadable. His voice was flat and cold. Amanda, get Miss Vance a glass of water. It was a command. It was a dismissal. In front of the entire executive team, her peers, her superiors, her rivals, she was reduced from a high-level VP to an errand girl. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. She turned, her movements stiff and wooden. The executives who had moments ago been her colleagues now watched her with a terrible, fascinated pity. They parted, creating a path for her as she walked, almost running, toward the bar on the far side of the room. Now, Miss Vance, Grayson said, offering me his arm, if you'll come this way. Please, I said, laying my hand gently on his tuxedo sleeve. Call me Eleanor. Eleanor, he said, and the name sounded new in his mouth. He began to lead me away from the floral arrangement. The crowd moved with us, parting respectfully to let us through. The string quartet, having recovered, began to play again. This time it was something slow and quiet. I saw my son, David. He was standing near the grand exit, having clearly heard the commotion. His face was pale, his eyes wide. He looked lost, caught between the two halves of his life. He watched me, his mother, being escorted by the CEO. Then he saw his wife. Amanda was pushing her way back through the crowd. She was carrying a small silver tray. On it was a single glass of water. Her hands were shaking so badly that the ice cubes rattled against the crystal. She reached us, her chest heaving. She held the tray out to me, her eyes locked on the floor. I took the glass. "Thank you, dear," I said, my voice just as calm and polite as it had been at the dinner table. "That was very kind." She said nothing. She couldn't speak. I took a small sip. The water was cold. I handed the glass back to her. She took it, her fingers clumsy. I turned to Grayson. "Mr. Grayson, I find this party is a bit overwhelming. The lights are very bright. I believe I will be leaving now." He looked alarmed. "Leaving? But Miss Vance, Eleanor, we haven't talked. The board, the press—" "You have the company records," I said simply. "My contact information is in the original incorporation file. I assume you can find it." "Yes, of course, but we can schedule a lunch. I've been meaning to inspect the terrace on the 30th floor. I trust the trees have been well maintained?" Grayson blinked. The Founders Terrace? Yes, of course. They are perfect." "Good," I said. "Tuesday noon." It was not a request. "I will be there," he said quickly. "I'll have my driver take you home." "The executive car? That won't be necessary," I said. I looked past him, past the ring of curious executives, to my son. He was still standing by the door, watching. "David," I called out. My voice was not loud, but it cut through the room. "Will you be taking me home?" David looked at me. He looked at his wife, standing defeated, holding the tray. He saw his entire life reframed in one single shocking moment. He took a breath. He straightened his tie. He made his choice. "Yes, Mom," he said, his voice hoarse but clear. "Right now." He walked toward me. He didn't even look at Amanda. He came to my side and offered me his arm. I let go of Grayson's. "Mr. Grayson, board members," I said, nodding to them all. "Thank you for a lovely evening. The company is in good hands. The foundation is clearly still sound." I let David lead me toward the massive glass doors. The crowd parted for us. No one spoke. They just watched me leave. We passed Amanda. She was rooted to the spot, a living statue of her own ruined ambition, still holding the tray with my water glass. The cold night air hit my face. It was clean and real. The valet, seeing me on my son's arm, rushed to get David's car, not the black town car Amanda had ordered for me. We got into David's quiet sedan. He started the engine, and we pulled away from the curb, leaving the noise and the bright, hot lights of the gala behind. In the side mirror, I watched the Innovatech tower, my tower, shrink in the distance. David drove for a full minute, his hands locked on the wheel. "Mom," he finally whispered. His voice was shaking. You founded Innovatech." "Yes," I said, looking out the window at the city lights passing by. You were never a secretary." I turned to look at him. I smiled, a small, genuine smile. "Oh, I was," I said. "For the first 6 months. I was the founder, the engineer, the chief fundraiser, the secretary, and the janitor." I settled back into my seat. "Someone had to type the memos,"